Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Ari and Big Mike are proud to present the greatest podcast in the world. No snowflakes allowed, and summer is coming.
Buy your lottery tickets today, folks. We got it on the first take for the first try today.
You know, this is not the first time I got in the first take, and I did buy lotto tickets that didn't work for me.
I didn't even hold up my cue card.
Well, it happens. I can be a little quick sometimes. So, we got an excellent topic today. You know, for those who want to know, we're talking about poverty and differences in poverty and other things of that nature. And me and Ari read this amazing article. And Ari's going to break it down for you all, so let's hear it.
Michael Crichton, who is one of my favorite modern day authors, he gave a speech once. And he talked about how there's nothing like a 30-year-old newspaper to show you what the world is really like. And he says, you look at these articles and you look at all these names and like, who were these people? Were we really thinking about that 30 years ago? I mean, all these names and events that make no difference to anything going on today. Sometimes you find an article written a long time ago that just go a hell of a long way to explaining how we got here, how the world came to be the way it is right now. I mean, you hear people talking about clown world, where all these insane things are being done like they're normal. You see all of a sudden college students marching in favor of terrorism instead of the people who were attacked by terrorists. You wonder, how the hell did we get here? Sometimes you see that if you'd been paying attention for all these years, like Theodore Dalrymple was paying attention, maybe you could have seen it coming a long, long way away. And that's the article we have today. It's called What is Poverty by Theodore Dalrymple from the City Journal, 1999.
Okay. I mean, the article went a lot of places. So where would you like to start off first? Because really, there's so much to be said. Let's start off with the Michael Crichton. Actually, before we even get there, let's start off with Michael Crichton. What was poverty 30 years ago and what was poverty today? Like when you look at it.
It hasn't changed much from today. You're just talking about, if you want to talk about poverty from...
Hold on. Before you just hold on there. What was the difference in poverty 30 years ago versus poverty today?
Not much that I can think of.
All right. Well, I'm going to say one word, and tell me what you think.
All right.
The shame. People 30 years ago, if you're in New York City, right? There was a level of shame being on assistance. Like, you're so poor that you need welfare, you need WIC checks, you need like any of that stuff. There was a level of shame that went with it that is definitely not going nowadays. Nowadays, it seems like we're all about free shit. Like, how much free shit can I get? That's one big change, And it's not even like poor people who are just like, it's everybody. There's a lack of shame in this world today, and it's definitely comes from that.
What Theodore Dalrymple says in this article is he's talking about poverty in England. And the advantage of discussing poverty in England over poverty in America is that all the people he's talking about in these articles are white people. So the racial component that you might have in discussing these issues in America is just gone. But you realize that the effects, whether they're in America, whether they're in England or wherever they're having this comprehensive welfare state that removes all consequences from people's actions. The consequences of having that welfare state in place are remarkably similar no matter where you go. And he says that poverty in England doesn't mean being hungry or living without running water or medical care or even a TV. It's not about living in overcrowded housing development that lacks proper sanitation. It's not about working 14 hours a day in the bowels of some coal mine or some awful mill. And This is in industrial countries, people on the lower end of the income distribution have a lot of times, and we're talking about the people who are clients of the welfare state. I'm not talking about the working poor. I'm not talking about immigrants who come to to his country or this country or whatever, and start a small business, a bodega or a small shop or whatever, and then work with their family their way up. I'm not talking about that kind of poverty. What he's talking about is the poverty that is managed and by the comprehensive welfare state.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I brought up shame in the first place, is that there's now an expectation that this is going to be my life even if I don't work for it. You know, like I'm going to have certain things given to me by the state.
Well, what Dalrymple discusses, it says, is that instead of calling it poverty, call it what it is. He says what it is squalor. And some of Dalrymple's colleagues, Theodore Dalrymple, his real name is Anthony Daniels. He was a psychiatrist and general physician in a slum hospital and in a prison. And he wrote about his experiences. And like many doctors, it turns out to be an absolutely fantastic writer. He's got a way with words, and he's just got a real keen eye for observation. And also, Dr. Daniels traveled the world. He worked in places he worked in Africa, he worked in South America, he even visited North Korea. And what he says is that a lot of his colleagues in this hospital in the slum in England came from India, they came from the Philippines. And as immigrants, they come and they see things with fresh eyes. And he recounts an incident that happened in the hospital. An addict comes in having taken an overdose. And he was in intensive care all night and was attended to all night by these doctors. And he wakes up, and the first thing he says is, "Get me an effing roll-up." Right? He wanted a hand-rolled cigarette. First thing he did, he just demanded it, just like he had it coming. "Get me the F out of here." He was treating the doctors who just saved his life like they were his servants. Like, listen, I had this coming. I don't need to be grateful. I don't need to do anything. This is my due. This is what I have coming, and that is it.
Right. And again, that's entitlement and a lack of shame. Right? And that's the point that's what I got out of it, is that we no longer have to worry about if we don't work, we're not going to eat or have shelter or anything like that. You know, and it's gotten to the point that, like with his article, when it comes to all the state-sponsored everything, it's taken out a purpose to our life. It's taken out a reason to do. Like, if I was poor growing up in New York in the 70s and the 80s, and I could make myself into something else. I could get student loans, I can go to school, I could, get business loans, start a business. There was a lot of stuff I can do. I could get a job. Like, there was opportunities for growth that were there. And the reason why you did those opportunities is because you didn't want to live like this anymore. Now, a lot of people were stuck in that, the working poor. You know, we don't have the ability. I have to worry about getting a roof over my head and food in my belly. So there's still honor, in that. And it's like, we get to a point where we're like, wow, how are we really living? You know, in that article, he brings up Victorian England and the differences in poverty then versus poverty today. Like how poor people were a head shorter than rich people. Not because they were like lacking in, with certain, genetic abilities. It was because of nutrition. They just didn't have it. And therein lies a huge part of it. Like the way the poor is today versus what it was back in the day. And it's they're not poor anymore. They're not poor. Like what's poor person today would be a decently wealthy man back in the day.
I recently was at my parents' house, and I remember looking at pictures of my grandparents and my mother, my mother's two parents, and their three children, including my mother. And as it turns out, both my grandmother and my grandfather were a head shorter than any of their children. And I remember looking at this. I love my grandparents very much. And I remember looking at that and thinking to myself, what their lives must have been like growing up, not having grown as much as they could have due to hunger. And so that part of Dalrymple's article hit me really hard. But if you want to talk about how this same thing has come to America, a lot of the blame could be put on the Supreme Court. One of the worst Supreme Court justices. He was a hero, of course, among all my law school professors, but William Brennan. He was such a bad justice for the Supreme Court that I consider him one of the worst Americans there ever was. When he was asked upon his retirement what was the most important case he ever decided, he said, Goldberg versus Kelly. And I'm sure I don't see a glimmer of recognition there because it's
not a one. I have no idea.
Okay, Goldberg versus Kelly said that there are property interests, right? The Constitution protects life, liberty, and property. Well, now there's a new category called property interests. That when somebody is, quote unquote, owed welfare, it's not quite their property, but it's not quite non-property, which can be taken away by the state at any point if you're discovered to be a welfare cheat. And New York City was having a problem with people cheating on welfare. And William Brennan and his cabal on the Supreme Court ruled that the welfare payments couldn't be taken away without some sort of due process. All of a sudden, it became very difficult to get people off of welfare. And one of the things that produced in America a lot of the same squalor that Theodore Dalrymple was observing back in 1999 in England. And what Dalrymple goes on to say about his patients is that his colleagues from India, from the Philippines, or whatever would come, and they would see these people who were completely ungrateful for all the good that's been done for them. One woman had come in, and she had overdosed, this time intentionally, because her life was such a complete mess. Her boyfriend was completely abusive, and she kept on inviting him over and over and over. And of course, he got her pregnant. He smashed up her apartment. And one of these foreign doctors asks, "But what's going to happen with her apartment? I mean, it's all smashed up. She can't live there." And he says, "Here's what's going to happen. They're going to get her a new apartment. They're going to furnish it. They're going to buy her a new TV. They're going to keep on paying her." And these people, these doctors looked, it's like, you're living in clown world. And that was the result of having these benefits as a right, and never having to struggle to get it. And I'm not suggesting that there be any particular policy, but that if the politicians running the show and making these payments really were interested in making the lives of citizens better, they'd be a lot more interested in what's really going on. I remember discussing articles like this with people who were passionately invested in the welfare state, and having to hear that I just hate the poor, or I don't want anybody below me to come on up, or whatever nonsense they used to say. And I always remember thinking to myself, geez, if these people were as concerned about humanity as they claim to be, they'd probably have a little bit more interest in what actually results from the welfare state.
I mean, listen, I'm not a student of the law. I don't know much about the law. I know more about psychology, right? And I'll tell you this much right now. There was a movie came out about 30 years ago or so called Dave, starring Kevin Kline,
I remember
where,
that one, yeah.
and now remember in the movie, what did he do for a living? He worked at he owned a temp agency, and then he winds up, becoming, he's the president's doppelganger. President has for those who didn't see the movie, the president has a stroke, a very major stroke. So he goes and steps in and acts like he's the president because he's, looks just like him. So in his time as acting like the president, he decides that he wants to start this jobs program. And what was his response? It wasn't about the money. It was about how we feel as people. When we work, listen, if I give you $20 for no reason, here's $20. What are you going to do with the $20? Most likely spend it because it wasn't hard earned. It was just given. It was a gift. But if you worked for that $20, you mowed my lawn for those $20, you're not wasting that $20 as quickly. It's like first rule of fundraising: go into people who are in finance, banking, lawyers, doctors, people who get their money easier. Right? That's the first rule of fundraisers. Because if you have a plumber or somebody who works in the trades who has the same amount of money, they're less likely to give you the money. Right? Why? Because of how hard they worked for it. And I'm not saying that doctors and lawyers and the such are not hardworking. It's a much more of an intellectual work than it is a physical work. Right? So that changes psychologically how you look at the money. When we go around in life, we need purpose. We need reasons for doing things. Now, in every society, you have people, no matter how high they go, they're always going to want more. But the majority of people, if we've been given everything, how many of us will still strive to do better? We don't need to work. Why? Because I've got a roof over my head, clothes on my back, food in my belly. I've got some cash in the bank. I've got like a TV. I've got like everything I need. So really, what is it that's going to drive me to do better?
One other thing that Dalrymple mentions in this article is his time working as a doctor in Africa. When he was in Africa, he saw some terrible stuff. For example, he discussed one patient who was having heart failure, and he had to walk to get treatment in the broiling sun, 50 miles each way, with his legs absolutely swelling. I mean, that is a horror that not too many people in the modern day West have seen or can ever actually imagine having happened to them. So Theodore Dalrymple is obviously a compassionate man.
He is, but I have a question for you on that guy, though.
What?
I mean, think about the effect of doing that. How much that man wanted to live. How much he was willing to fight for himself. Right? What happened with the rest of his life? I'm very curious about that. But that's the point I'm making. Right? When we have purpose, when we're driven to do things, when we, it's like we don't have that shame of, I don't have to do it. I don't want to do it. Okay, so everything's going to be given to me, right? This guy still fought for his life because there's a purpose. He has a purpose. And when we have purposes, we strive for more.
You make an excellent point. And this is how Theodore Dalrymple concludes his article. He says, "Yet nothing I saw," he's talking about in Africa, "neither the poverty nor the overt oppression," he had terrible stories about that, "ever had the same devastating effect on the human personality as the undiscriminating welfare state. I never saw the loss of dignity, the self-centeredness, the spiritual and emotional vacuity, or the sheer ignorance of how to live that I see daily in England. The worst poverty is in England, and it's not of material poverty, but poverty of the soul."
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about it. It's like we have so much emptiness that how many, what is that phrase? We go through like lives of quiet desperation because we get comfortable, we get fat, we get lazy, and it doesn't, and it's like we get to this point where we take away hope. right? We're just basically surviving to die. And when we look at that abject poverty, and that's what we are, and we create a world of citizens based off of that, we're in trouble. And I'm going to end with this. Look at the flip side. We call the men who fought in World War II, the greatest generation ever. The men who fought in World War II lived through abject poverty through the Great Depression from 1929 till they got into the war. That's all they knew growing up was horror and poverty. But yet, these are the guys who fought their asses off in Guadalcanal, who D-Day, storming those beaches at Normandy, doing all these things, putting their lives at risk. And they were doing it as men of honor. When you take away honor, when you take away virtue, when you take away, all the things that we've been talking about, people don't strive to do more. But when they have that honor and they have their dignity and they have that integrity, you see how great they really can become. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening. Y'all have a great morning, a great afternoon, and great night. All the best.
And don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Thank you all for listening.